Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. Connect with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading on social media. On YouTube, subscribe to our channel at Grade Level Reading. On LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram, follow us at Campaign for GLR. And on X, follow us at Reading by Third. Please use the hashtag Learning Tuesdays and tag us to share anything you learned from today's webinar, and we will be sure to reshare. We encourage you to post any questions, reflections, and observations on social media. Once again, welcome to today's webinar. My name is Sierra Sanchez, and I'll be behind the scenes helping to produce the conversation. Before we get started, I just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge our enterprise and programmatic funders, as well as our individual donors. Your support not only allows us to hold these vital conversations, but also helps us create meaningful opportunities to share insights, foster connections, and build the CGLR community. I also want to give special thank you to our Leo sustaining sponsors, who you can see on this screen here. Thank you for your support as we continue our Learning Tuesdays every week. And before we jump in, I just wanted to share a few housekeeping details with you. First, we would love for you to introduce yourself, so please use the chat box at the bottom of the screen to share your name, city, or state, and your organization. Be sure when you're responding to select everyone so that we can all see each other's chat messages and know who's here in the room with us. We also encourage you to share any thoughts and insights throughout the duration of the webinar in the chat box. All attendees are in listen-only mode, but we encourage your engagement by posting questions in the Q&A box. We will dedicate the last portion of the webinar to respond to the questions you post, and our panelists will be typing out answers to those questions throughout the webinar. The conversation is being recorded and live streamed on Facebook. A link to the recording, as well as all slides, bios, and resources, will be sent in a follow-up email to everyone who registered. And lastly, we will be posting a brief poll right towards the end of the session and highly encourage you to respond. This helps us with our commitment to continuous improvement. And the last thing before we get started, I just wanted to make sure you were aware of some of our upcoming webinars that we have in the month of March. Next week on March 3rd, we have an Emerging Models webinar with more than an accessibility feature, same language subtitling, learning, and literacy, kind of diving into the importance of SLS in learning and literacy. On March 10th, we have a very exciting double header with Parents as Essential Partners. At 12:30 on March 10th, we will have a Crucible of Practice salon, Building Public Will for Literacy by Igniting Parent and Family Engagement. And at 3 p.m., to kind of continue the conversation a little bit, we will have Parents as Essential Partners, Beating the Odds and Reducing Chronic Absenteeism. So if you're all about parent engagement, we would love to see you on Tuesday, March 10th for that exciting double header. And on March 17th, we will have a session on the teacher pipeline, Creating Enduring Pathways into Teaching at 3 p.m. All of the great registration links and more information will be linked in the chat box now, and we hope that you can join us. And joining you now is Jenny Atkinson with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading. Thank you and enjoy.
Thank you so much, Sierra. I'm really happy to welcome all of you to today's GLR Learning Tuesday session, Children's Savings Accounts and Emerging Federal Policy Opportunities and Implications. Research shows, and you'll hear about some of it today, that child savings accounts, or CSAs, boost the chances of college attendance and completion, which is associated with higher lifetime earnings, economic mobility, and family economic success. These outcomes closely align with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading's mission to disrupt the generational cycle of poverty. And in recent years, we've highlighted the importance of children's savings accounts in several webinars. One focused on research, again, showing how CSAs are a powerful driver of financial inclusion and long-term economic opportunity for young people. And a second highlighted the role that philanthropy has been playing to foster their growth. With the recent passage of H.R. 1 in 2022 establishing 530A accounts, there's been growing momentum and renewed attention on these tools for saving and their critical importance, which is why we're returning again to this topic today. We're excited to hear about both children's savings accounts and baby bonds, as well as learn more about the new federal accounts. And we have a fantastic group of panelists with us here for this conversation, some of whom have been leaders in the field as researchers, advocates, and implementers for decades. They include Ray Bashara, who's with WashU in St. Louis in the Aspen Institute, William Elliott III, PhD, a professor at the University of Michigan and the director of the Center for Assets, Education, and Inclusion, Rebecca Loya, PhD and Research Director with the San Francisco Treasurer's Office, Jennifer Petetti, the Director of Strategic Initiatives with the Office of State Treasurer Eric Russell in Connecticut, and Carl Rist, Member at Large with the Durham City Council in North Carolina. We're so excited to have all of these panelists with us today, and you can read more about them in the biodoc that I'll post in the chat momentarily. We're also so grateful to have Tabitha Blackwell, the Executive Director of Book Harvest Durham in North Carolina, with us today as our moderator. She oversees all of Book Harvest's operations and programming in Durham, which includes the Book Babies Bright Future CSA program that you'll also hear a little bit more about. Welcome, Tabitha, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Jenny. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Over the past several decades, children's savings accounts have evolved from an innovative idea into a growing national movement. And at their core, these programs have been more than a savings. They have been about shifting trajectories. And so research, as she mentioned, shows that when children have even a modest savings set aside for their future, sometimes is even as small as $500, there's significantly more likely to enroll in and complete college. And having been a part of a CSA program. So we have Bright Futures here with our program Book Babies, where each of our babies, each of our participants receive not only amazing literacy coaching, but they also receive $100 for each year they are in our program, which is a total from birth all the way to age 5. So that's $500. And we know that beyond the dollars, what matters just as much is the message: you have a future worth investing in. And so we are also in a pivotal moment in our country. Local and state efforts, from CSAs to baby bonds, have been expanding across the country. And with the passage of the federal legislation establishing 530A accounts, sometimes we refer to them as Trump accounts, a new national vehicle has entered the landscape. As today's conversation is really about understanding these broader ecosystem of child-focused wealth building tools. These models share common goals: long-term opportunities, expanding access ownership, asset ownership, narrowing wealth gaps. We really want to think about the pathway, creating pathways to long-term opportunities for children. And as these approaches begin to overlap, a lot of times, we really want to have a couple of questions. How do they align? Where might there be some duplication and confusions? And most importantly, how do we ensure that the families, especially those most in need, are able to access and benefit from them? So let's begin by outlining how we'll move through this discussion today. So first, we'll ground ourselves in the landscape of savings and wealth building vehicles. So we have a shared understanding of what exists and how they compare. And from there, we're going to really start looking closer at the new federal 530A account and what we're hearing from both Treasury and policymakers as implementation begins to take shape. Then we'll take a step back into the research to understand what evidence tells us about why early asset building matters and the long-term educational financial outcomes connected to those programs or to these programs. And from there, we'll then invite all of our panelists to jump into a really rich conversation. But to start us off, we'll begin with grounding ourselves in the various savings vehicles and how they differ. I am excited to be joined by Carl Rist, who has been dedicated to this work, as many on this panel have, for years and years, to walk us through children's savings accounts, baby bonds, 530A accounts. We've heard lots of different terms to really provide a key similarities and distinctions across these models. So Carl, over to you.
Thank you so much, Tobias. So glad to be on the call. So glad to be here with everyone who's participating, and also my the big team of folks who are, it's almost like, getting the band back together to be on a call with all these great experts. So it's so glad to be here. I'm actually wearing two hats today. So as many of you know, I was on, I think, the two previous webinars that the Campaign for Grade Level Reading did on children's savings accounts. That was in my role as a consultant, previously working on this issue for about 25 years. I've now transitioned onto a role as an elected official in Durham on the city council, but I'm still very involved in this. So I want to share a couple thoughts here right now about these different kinds of accounts with my hat as a former practitioner in this field, but then we'll transition later to talking about what we're doing in the city of Durham to address the new opportunity with the federal legislation. So just real quick, as Tabitha said, we've got for the last 25 years, there's been a growing movement to find ways to build wealth for kids, starting even at the earliest days, as early as birth. And there's a number of tools out there, all of which are designed to build wealth and aspirations, address wealth inequality, build financial education, and so forth. And so they all share the same objectives largely, but there are some fine distinctions between them. And so as we jump into this conversation about the new federal opportunity with the 530A accounts, it's good to just level set and make sure everyone on the call understands the differences, the fine differences between these different tools that all are very much like, they're all siblings, all related, but have some fine differences. It's also worth noting that some of these approaches or these accounts are based on an actual savings account with some plan elements. Others are based more on an idea that then sort of connects to some kind of account to support it. So let me just go through the different accounts here on the slide just to make sure everyone is aware of these different concepts. So the first thing is 529 plans. So these were created by the federal government back in 1996. These are essentially tax advantage savings accounts to save for post-secondary or other eligible education. Anyone can set up one of these accounts. In fact, every state except Wyoming has their own 529 account. There is not necessarily an initial deposit, but many states like California, Maine, Nebraska, and Illinois have now set up programs to fund accounts with initial deposits at birth or early in life. But those are only states that have chosen to do this. Not every state is doing that, but some have chosen to do that. Those accounts are owned by the family, and there's no guaranteed investment by the public in these accounts. But if a state chooses to do that, they may do so. And again, many states have done that, but it's certainly not every state. Then the second column is child savings accounts. This is more of a concept that I and Ray Bashar, who's on this call, Willie Elliott, and Becca Loy and others have been involved in for the last 25 years to find ways to create savings opportunities for kids early in life, especially kids who need asset building the most. And this you can think of it almost as like version 1.0 of this idea. Started with pilots and supported by philanthropy and has grown since then. There are now I think there's about 120 plus programs across the country in 38 states with more than 5 million kids savings. So this is a fairly well documented strategy. And I think Willie Elliott will talk about a lot of the data that comes from these child savings accounts. These are mainly designed for building aspirations and college-bound identity. The eligibility is based on the program itself, whether it's at the local level, state level, or philanthropically or nonprofit program. But it's all based on the actual program itself. These are typically modest accounts with initial deposits in the range of $100 or maybe $50. These are often held by some public manager or third-party entity, not by the families themselves. And there's no guaranteed public investment. Again, it all depends on the actual program at the local, state, or nonprofit level. Then the third is maybe what we might think of as another great idea. This is kind of baby bonds. This is almost version 2.0 of this idea of building wealth for kids. These are accounts that are much more designed very consciously to address equity and to address a range of wealth building opportunities, whether education or starting a small business, buying a home, or even retirement. These are often targeted universal programs. I know that we've got a speaker from Connecticut. We'll talk about the program in Connecticut, which is auto-enrolling all kids who qualify for Medicaid. The initial deposit in these baby bonds accounts is much larger, $3,000 or more in the case of Connecticut. If you look at the proposal from Aisha Presley and Cory Booker for baby bonds, it's $1,000 at birth and up to $2,000 per year for kids who may qualify. These are held in different ways, and in some ways, this is still a very much emerging sort of strategy. So Connecticut's the one state that's doing this in sort of on the ground. California has a pilot program, but who controls the account and what the account is really still to be determined in many cases by the different initiative. There is guaranteed public investment in these accounts. Again, it depends on which state or which entity is setting them up. And then, of course, we have the new 530A or Trump accounts, which is a brand new initiative just created by the budget bill that passed a couple of years ago. This is really designed much more to engage kids in owning appreciable assets that could be used for a range of purposes, whether it's post-secondary education, small business, home ownership, or retirement. These accounts are universal at birth if you qualify, if one parent has a Social Security number. The initial deposit is now $1,000. This is real money, looking more like the sort of baby bonds kind of version as opposed to the smaller dollars in CSAs. These are accounts that are owned by the individual. It's a restricted account that at 18 becomes like an IRA. And there is definitely guaranteed public investment here. So the 530A accounts, in some ways, address some of the challenges we've had for years in the CSA movement, in the sense that it provides a real account and real dollars in the account. That on the CSA side, you've always got to figure out, okay, who's going to provide the account product, and where does the initial dollars come from? So that's just a quick glance at what's there in the marketplace and how they differ, even though they're all helping to build wealth for kids from the earliest days. Let me turn it back to Dabaitha. I know Ray Bashar is going to talk more about the particular opportunity of this new 530A account.
Absolutely. And I'll go ahead and turn it over to Ray.
Yes, hi. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Dabaitha and Carl. I appreciate the opportunity here. I have 10 minutes to explain a pretty complex, brand new financial product to help kids build wealth. As Carl said, this is the new kid on the block, the Trump accounts, also called 530A accounts, which refers to the section of the tax code that they're in right after 529s. So just 4 slides, bear with me here. So what is a 530A account? So it's a traditional IRA, not a Roth IRA, that has special rules prior to age 18. Those special rules have one overarching goal, which is to grow the account as much as possible so that young adults have investable sums or startup capital to begin their financial lives. So how do they achieve having those sums of money by age 18? In 3 ways. First, no withdrawals before 18, not for hardship, not for anything. Once the money's in, it stays in until age 18. Secondly, requiring that the funds be invested in a broad-based index fund such as the S&P 500. And third, and this is probably the most unique feature of the accounts, is using tax incentives to encourage a wide range of investors, what Willie has called multiple streams of assets in a child's future. So let me go through some of the details. We can move on to the next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay, this is a more detailed version of what Carl just went over, comparing CSAs, baby bonds, and Trump accounts. I'm not going to go through it now, but you'll have it for reference. We will go to the next slide, which has much more details on 530A accounts. All right, this is our attempt at the Aspen Institute to explain succinctly this new complex product called the 530A account. We've come up with this table here called Follow the Money. And let me just start over on the left-hand side. So how do these accounts get established? So first of all, you have to understand that there's essentially 2 different programs, one for newborns who were born between 2025 and 2028, okay? They automatically will get $1,000 at birth, provided they apply for the account and activate it. But then there's also a voluntary creation of a 530A account for any child under age 18, okay? So the child actually owns the account, and they must have a Social Security number, and they must be a citizen if they want to receive the $1,000 federal deposit. Here's how you actually get one of these accounts. Starting on January 2nd of this year, you can file tax form 4547 with your tax return or as a standalone form, or you can go to this new portal that just opened up a couple weeks ago, trumpaccounts.gov, and you can claim your account there. We just learned from the Treasury Department that over 3 million Americans have already claimed their accounts. Once you've done that successfully, Treasury will then establish the account at a financial institution, what they call a trustee, that it has yet to select. Okay. That financial institution will notify the family, who then must activate the account. And then after July 5th of this year, money can start flowing in from all different sources. The field has been urging the administration to automatically enroll all kids at birth using Social Security numbers. They have not adopted that policy yet, but we hope that they do in the future. Second column is money in. Okay, so as I mentioned, one of the most unique features of this product is the fact that multiple streams of investors can contribute to these accounts. There's no earned income requirement and there's no income limit. So what are the different sources of money? As mentioned, there's a $1,000 pre-tax contribution from the federal government if you were born over that 4-year pilot period. Families and other outside contributors connected to the family, like grandparents and others, can put up to $5,000 a year, but that's after-tax money, like contributing to a Roth or a 529. Then on top of that, employers can put in money if they want, up to $2,500 a year. And on top of that, what's probably most unique is something called the general contribution. And this allows nonprofits, philanthropists, cities, states, and tribes to also put money into the account. And interestingly, the money they put in is unlimited, provided that all the contributions are equal and that they serve a geographic area of at least 5,000 kids. Okay, so you have all these different opportunities to build up the account prior to age 18, both using pre-tax and post-tax money. Money invested, as mentioned already, it has to be invested in a qualified index such as the S&P 500, and the fees have to be kept low. Money out. At age 18, the account essentially becomes a traditional IRA. A traditional IRA generally means that because the money was pre-tax going in, it was not taxed, that you will pay taxes on the money coming out. All right. And so it's taxed as ordinary income. It's like having wage income. It's taxed as ordinary income. And the rules say that you can pretty much use a traditional IRA for anything that you want. However, the tax consequences vary depending on the use. If you use it for more traditional things, like asset building things like buying a home and going to college and saving for retirement, you do not pay an additional 10% penalty. But if you use it for a vacation or a car or starting a business, something like that, then you would pay an additional 10% tax. One thing that I would point out that's an important difference between 529s and 530A accounts is that 529s, of course, must be used for post-secondary education and training, whereas a 530A account includes that use, but it has much broader uses. So they offer more flexibility to families who may or may not be quite sure that their child will use the funds for education. And then finally, the money remaining, if you do nothing, it simply stays as a traditional IRA. And after age 18, there are concerns that families could be kicked off of a public assistance program by saving in a 530A account, but the rules vary by state and by program. Okay, next slide. Okay, as you may have heard, back in December, Michael and Susan Dell pledged $6.25 billion to 530A accounts to kids around the country. Any kid who lives in a zip code with a median family income of $150,000 or less qualifies for a $250 contribution from the Dells. They still have to open their account and claim it, as I talked about before. But if they do all that, then they are eligible to receive this money from the Dells. The Dalio family did something similar for Connecticut. And Brad Gerstner, a tech entrepreneur, is doing something similar for kids in Indiana. But we've also had about 20 different employers step up and say that we're going to match the $1,000 that the federal government's going to put in. And then 2 states so far, Oklahoma and Texas, have also offered to match on a statewide basis the $1,000 that the federal government put in. And on Capitol Hill, two most unlikely senators to come together, Ted Cruz and Cory Booker, sent a letter to Fortune 1000 CEOs saying, please take advantage of this provision, to match the contributions of the federal government. So, and I expect a lot more nonprofits and corporations will continue to take advantage of these opportunities to fund the accounts. Okay, one more slide, and I will move on. I think there's much to like and much to be concerned about with 530A accounts. Just going back to that slide that Carl put up, I would say that you should really think hard about what strategy best aligns with your goals. I think that CSAs and baby bonds and 530A accounts have very different platforms, very different products, very different purposes. And you have to think hard about which one best aligns with what you're trying to do in your community. And I don't think at the moment there's opportunities for the three of them to work together, but maybe down the road. So what's really good, it's now national law. We've been working on this idea for 20 years and it's finally in law. Opening up the stock market to the bottom half of the population is a pretty untested and pretty exciting idea. As I said, multiple investors in the kid's future, more uses at age 18. You can potentially scale up financial education. We have a lifelong savings and retirement product, which is exciting. We've never had anything quite like that. There's bipartisan interest in improving them. Some things that concern me, this bill was drafted very quickly in less than 60 days with some errors and not a lot of room for input. I think the tax-based filing and opening system is going to leave out, especially the families who most need the accounts. There are no progressive deposits, meaning more for the poor, although some of that will be compensated for by the philanthropic contributions in certain areas. We're very concerned that this program could discontinue after 2028. I'm going to be on Capitol Hill all next week working on that, trying to make sure that we can extend this program. There's a concern that many low-income families will lose public assistance like food stamps and Medicaid by saving. There might be better tax benefits with other products if you're in a higher income tax bracket. And the greater flexibility at age 18 is both a pro and a con, depending on your perspective. So I have much more to share. This is a lot to take in. I think look forward to the Q&A to follow. Thank you.
Thank you, Ray. Both you and Carl went through a lot of information and a lot of grounding in this particular topic. And we would be remiss if we did not look to the evidence. So why are we having this conversation, and why have people dedicated a huge chunk of their work and their lives to really focusing on this? And so, Willie, I will turn it over to you to really dig into the evidence and why these vehicles matter.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And you should have a slide come up on your screen real shortly here. And at the beginning of the slide, you'll see where it says the beginning, Assets in the Poor, 1991, is written by Michael Sherraden. And even though we portrayed these and do portray these and continue to talk about these as very different accounts, whether we're talking about the CSA, the baby bond, 503A, all these things, really, they all spring out of this theoretical framework that Sherraden developed in 1991 in his plain book. And so I think it's important to understand, both in understanding the evidence for the field and understanding what I'm going to largely talk about CDAs, right? Because with regard to the others, we really don't have, if we're considering them different things, we don't have direct evidence for them because they're relatively new and there hasn't been research done on them. So the bulk of the research for which all this stems out of, it really is around the CDA field. I will point out a quick couple of things. CDA, sometimes they're called child development accounts, sometimes they're called child savings accounts, the same thing. But they can range, they're not just $100 or less, right? They can be $500, $1,000. And when Sheridan originally proposed them, he proposed far more money in these accounts. But the reality with research is that when they started, there wasn't a lot of interest or money to be used to do these programs, to test these ideas. And so they started off as small dollar accounts, not because that was theoretically what anybody thought they should be or what they could become. It was simply what money that existed that we could put in accounts. If we could have put 40,000 in accounts, we would have put 40,000 in accounts, but it wasn't available. And that's relevant to understand even how the research has developed. In the beginning, the research was really focused on individual savings in these accounts. And on this line, you'll see this kind of timeline that I've created. There really is, there's a long term, which is in the blue on the bottom, and short term outcomes. Short term, one of the things about a children's savings account or child development account is that we envision it to start very young, either at birth or when the child entered kindergarten, sometime very early on in their life, which meant it, one of the main goals of them became, and even that was a narrowing down based upon policy and what people were funding. They became focused exclusively on education. But in the beginning, they were supposed to have these multiple purposes. And so what we see really is a almost full circle and in a broad, as we gain more evidence for children development accounts in very specific areas, we were able to expand interest, expand money for them, and broaden them back out to something more close like they were originally envisioned. We're still not 100% there, but we're getting closer to that. And so short-term outcomes referred to because kids were so far off from graduating, which became one of the main goals of the children's savings accounts as they were practiced, was because, and I did a lot of research around, was because the kids were young. And so we had to think about what are metrics we might use when a kid's in, let's say, kindergarten, first grade, second grade, that are predictive of whether or not they'll go to college. And that really is the kind of short-term outcome perspective on the top line that you see, as opposed to the bottom line where you see stuff focused on college enrollment. The other thing about that is that we have far more evidence with regard to short-term outcomes, understandably, because as kids have aged in these programs, we'll talk about K2C here in a minute, Becca will, and now the kids are reaching college age, but we've had those kids in the program all that time. And so one of the other things you'll see in this kind of timeline here is that in the beginning days, we started off just testing the idea that Sheridan had proposed. And we started off with things like net worth, which is not really the same as being in a children's savings account program or children's development account program, but it's just how much they have on their ledger, how much they have on their balance sheet, what is their net worth. Whereas a children's development account is specific to kids having money as they become for college or for a specific goal, where net worth is your overall evaluation of your balance sheet. And so while these were suggestive and useful, and we shouldn't throw that evidence away, it was very important for our development. It wasn't like being in a child savings account. Then we moved on to a period in which we were able to see parents and find data sets that allowed us to look at parents who had savings in their accounts for college for their kids. And then moved on from there. We found that we had predictors we had some data from the PSID that allowed us to look at kids who had savings accounts in their name and who designated some of that money for college, right? And that was getting much closer to what we saw in the sense of children having an account open for them that was putting money in that account for them to go to college, right? And so while it still wasn't them participating in a program, it was evidence around, it was closer to that idea. And so and then we started, I say we, really, the Center of Social Development and a bunch of funders and others started the COK randomized control experiment in Oklahoma, which followed kids, about 2,000 kids from birth all the way, and they're now reaching college age, but allowed us to have a randomized control trial data. And along the way, they were able to test things like parental expectations, social emotional development, which is really important and predictive things for kids' future enrollment in school. So you saw this evolution, not only in the sense of starting off with these net worth proxies, then moving on to more specific, better defined proxies, then moving on to practice data from programs, having a actual randomized controlled trial that existed to prove these things. And like I said, a lot of the evidence around those things are really around these short-term metrics: how well they do in school, academic achievement, social emotional development, maternal depression, communication between parent and child, and how that affects things. All these kinds of things we're beginning to test. With regard to the idea of going to college, I'm trying to watch my time here because the time goes so fast, is that because we had to wait for kids to get into college, a lot of our evidence, a lot of our theory development, a lot of our kind of just understanding of the field drove from in the beginning, very kind of explanatory network types of studies to the more quasi-experimental studies using secondary data that was actually kids having savings in their accounts. And so while we might want to move away from this history, to me, when you start thinking about causation and really strength of evidence, it really comes down to not any one particular study, but that the fact that the children's savings account, the asset building field, rest on this larger body of evidence that used a variety of methods, not only quantitative, with the difference between using propensity score analysis and hierarchical intermodeling and with different subsets and different groups and all these things, but also qualitative analysis. And so we built kind of a large body of evidence around children's savings accounts in different locations with different people across the country. And that strengthens where we're at today. That gives us, it help us to develop theory and ideas and revamp and shape our children's savings account programs so that they are better designed. And it really brought us to the space that we're at now. Now we're in a space where we actually have some kids who have been through the program for multiple years and are now college age, and we're beginning to test that. I would suggest to you, because these CDAs are really going towards their original intent was for multiple purposes, it'll be very interesting, and this timeline would extend out to go beyond college. This was specifically about college, but to go beyond college and think about how it affects long-term wealth accumulation, how it affects how people are preparing for retirement, even buying a home, and all these different life stages that people go through, and how do these programs impact those, and how do we continue to invest in these programs and not see them as a kind of endpoint when kids graduate high school and turn 18. I got 19 seconds. And we're really at the beginning stages of that, where we're almost returning to the beginning phase, where with the long-term effects of CDAs, we don't yet have kids there. And so now we're looking at secondary data sets and proxies to allow us to begin to understand and build the theory out and understand how policy should be developed. I'm stopping here in a second. By using these secondary data sets now. And we're starting to see a fairly solid body of evidence to suggest that these programs will have impacts that extend beyond college and really strengthen the return on degree in the long term. So I'll stop there. We can talk about it later.
Yeah, I so appreciate you talking about not really what is the long-term impact within all of this work, because as you said, lots of these are newer. And so thank you all for, all of you for grounding us in the policy landscape and the research. We've talked about sort of the structure of these particular programs. We've talked about the evidence, and now we really want to shift to what it looks like in practice, because these programs ultimately rise and fall based on how they're implemented in real communities. And so for this next portion, let's talk about what it looks like on the ground. So Jennifer, Rebecca, and Carl is working at the city and state levels where policies and programs meet families. They're navigating enrollment systems, funding constraints, community conversations, political realities, partnerships, and most importantly, community trust. And that's really where the real learnings happen. And so to kick us off, I'm going to ask Jennifer if she can come on and tell us briefly about your program. And then as you think about your own, city state, what is a key lesson you've learned in the midst of implementation and turning your program into real opportunities for families most in need?
Thanks so much. Thanks for the question and excited to kick things off. I think there was a really great sort of overview that Carl and Ray gave in terms of what the program that we have in Connecticut. So for every child in Connecticut born beginning July 1, 2023, whose birth is covered by Medicaid, $3,200 is set aside into a trust that is managed and invested by the treasurer's office. And once that child turns 18, between the ages of 18 and 30, they have access to those funds to use for a series of wealth building initiatives. So to either purchase a home in Connecticut, to start a business in Connecticut, to go to college or do job training, or to save for retirement. And so we were really lucky in Connecticut that we were able to pre-fund the program for 12 years. We utilized a reserve fund that the state had. And so we immediately started investing about $390 million. And that was intended to, both go towards the investment for that first class or cohort of babies, but also to fund a full 12 years of deposits. So like I said, we were lucky to be able to sort of find that reserve fund and use it and invest it immediately, which we think has been really key to the program and making sure that there's longevity. I will say, in terms of, one of the first lessons, the early lessons that we're learning as we're implementing the program is how important community and family engagement is. We know that, baby bonds doesn't exist in a vacuum, and it's only sort of one piece of the puzzle, and that it's really important that we are sort of taking a two-gen approach. And so we are focused on the babies, and we know that they, will have access to these funds and, the first class of babies in about 15 and a half years. But we want to get families engaged now, and we think it's really important that we, ensure that their parents have the right support that they need. And we're doing the work to engage with community partners and organizations. We have a robust ambassador network that we have launched. So we're really trying to kind of set the foundation to make sure that this program, the promise of baby bonds, has the maximum impact on families in, the next 15 and a half years. So.
Thank you. And what you said about, it truly is not just putting money into an account and hoping that parents and families will know what to do. A lot of times it does take that extra education and other things to really move the needle. And so I'm going to pass it over. Rebecca, I'd love if you'd hop in and tell us a little about your program and some of your key lessons.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Tabitha, for having me here today. So as I think you said in the introduction, I'm the research director at the San Francisco Treasurer's Office, which is home to the Kindergarten to College CSA program. And in my previous position, I spent 10 years researching and supporting children's savings account initiatives at Brandeis University. So just so excited to be part of this conversation. So a little bit about Kindergarten to College, which we call K to C. Our program launched in 2011 as the nation's first municipal universal CSA program. what we do is automatically open an account for every child in SFUSD from kindergarten through 12th grade, and it's seeded with $50 in public funds. And then families can contribute their own funds without taking any additional steps. They don't have to open a different account or anything like that. And then we also offer quite a number of incentives to help families grow their balances. So, for instance, every time if a family logs in and views their balance, we do a $20 bonus deposit, and they can earn that once every single school year, just as an example. And so I think Willie mentioned our program is one of the first to see students all the way through from kindergarten through college enrollment. So far we've had more than 4,700 graduates from our first 3 graduating classes access more than $2.9 million to use for that post-secondary education. So it's really exciting. And Willie's team has also been doing an evaluation of our program and has found a measurable impact on college enrollment. So what we set out to do, the theory of change, we're showing it's actually happening. We see that K-C students are 6 percentage points more likely to enroll in college overall. And that effect is driven almost entirely by gains for underrepresented students of color. So for that subset of underrepresented students, the effect size is 12 percentage points. And so to get back to your question, Tabitha, like what is the most important lesson that we've learned? I would say probably it's that automatic, universal, community-based design, this very intentional approach that our treasurer took 15 years ago when he got this program set up in partnership with Gavin Newsom was something that allowed us to reach every single child in the district, regardless of their family's, let's say, immigration status, regardless of their comfort with different financial products, et cetera. And then to echo what Jennifer's saying, it's not enough to just put the money there. Of course, it's ongoing work to continually, and from many quarters, remind them that somebody believes in you and has made this investment. So I'm really excited for this conversation because I feel like our experience has shown that when CSAs and other wealth building programs are done right, they have tremendous promise, but it's not necessarily simple, right? They need to be done right. And they can, if they're done wrong, kind of exacerbate divides and inequalities. Thanks.
Yeah, and to your point where you were talking about sort of that the universality of it being super important. In our program for Bright Futures, it's specifically for the kids in our program, which is a very small subset of Medicaid eligible kids. And so we have found that one of the key lessons that we've learned in having it be really for specific participants is the community trust and them needing to really have a trusted agent because we're essentially saying we're giving you free money. And that is something that a lot of folks are skeptical about. And if you're in communities, especially underserved communities or underrepresented communities, that's not their reality of people just providing free money or investing in a future. And that is something that has been something that we've worked really hard with is making sure that we're able to build a trusted relationship with families as we're working with them. And then as we think about that, how do we make it universal? That is where Carl comes in. And so we've been in a lot of different conversations in the city of Durham around what that could look like. And I would love just, Carl, if you could hop into the conversation and talk a little bit about sort of where we're thinking and where some of those community conversations are.
Yeah, thanks so much, Tobias. It's great to have you both as moderator, but also like a collaborator, key collaborator, troublemaker in Durham. So good to see you. And so great to hear from Jennifer and Becca about what you're doing. We aspire to be where you all are here in Durham. So as folks in the call can imagine, given my background, my deep background in this world of children's savings and wealth building for kids, as an elected official, after the legislation passed, the federal legislation authorizing the 538 accounts, I convened a bunch of folks, smart folks like Tobias and others in the community who have a stake in this to begin to have a conversation. Obviously, the legislation is very tricky and problematic for a lot of us. there's a lot of grief and anxiety and sort of frustration over the loss of benefits that folks now were experiencing, the loss of Medicaid benefits, the loss of SNAP, and so forth. At the same time, there was a realization as folks who are tasked with sort of being community leaders that there was this new opportunity with real dollars that was going to be available to kids, all kids, and including the kids that we care most about. And so we started a conversation last fall about how do we in the city of Durham properly respond to this opportunity of 538 accounts? How do we do that in a way that we can leverage it to the maximum to build wealth for all kids or as many kids as we could? And so that conversation started last fall. In the meantime, there was a parallel discussion going on similarly about how do we increase our benefits access generally in the city of Durham. Since COVID, we've frankly have kind of been flagging in terms of benefits access, especially helping folks to file taxes to make sure they qualify or that they receive the EITC or child tax credit that they would qualify for. So that conversation was going on in parallel. How do we increase those efforts? And then, at the end of the year, early in the new year, as it became clear that the main way to access the 538 accounts would be through filing taxes, it became clear in Durham that we had an opportunity to bring together these two conversations and link them in a way that could be powerfully impactful for all kids and families to increase their financial security. So we are now in the process of very quickly, as fast as we can, ramping up a re-energized tax time campaign in the city of Durham to both make sure all families that qualify, again, for benefits like the EITC and child tax credit are filing and getting those benefits. And then in some ways, we're using the new opportunity with the 538 accounts as almost like a hook to get people in the door. Hey, if you file taxes, it's something you should do every year to make sure you get the benefits you qualify for. Come on in this year, and hey, there's a new opportunity. If you have a child who's been recently born or a child below the age of 10, you also have the chance to open up this new account and get a significant investment in your child's future. So we're working on this rapidly. We've actually, through support from a local philanthropist, have actually added a staff person to work on this. Actually, I saw Dave Szyminski on the call. Good to see you, Dave, or good to hear or have you on the call. Your old colleague, Amelia, is the one who's helping us to do this. So we've got some key people with a lot of talent who are helping us to build this rapidly. We want to do this almost as a pilot basis this year. We know it's hard to ramp up a tax time campaign just on the spur of the moment. So we're trying to build the muscle here in Durham that we can build more an awareness of this. There'll be a large social marketing campaign led by the city of Durham, the county of Durham, major employers like Duke University to get the word out to families and to build that muscle so that next year we'll have more ability to train volunteers earlier in the process so that we can have more sites, more volunteers, more support to reach all the families we want to reach. We know that nationwide, about 20% of families who are eligible for the EITC don't file taxes. So we want to make sure we reach that body of folks who are not filing, who could file and qualify for both those tax-based benefits, but also the 538 accounts. So we're trying to build this rapidly, and I encourage other folks to think about this in your communities. This is an important way that we can bundle resources to build wealth for the future for kids, but also make sure families are getting those tax credits that can help them in the present to address their financial security needs. And then Tabitha, I think you asked the question, what did we learn? I think we kind of learned it's almost like a back to the future moment that like tax time now becomes, again, a huge moment for families to ensure financial security through these credits to build your savings for the future, but also in the immediate term dollars for financial security for families.
Yeah, absolutely. And it really is an entire sort of a piece or a part of an economic mobility strategy within the community. And that's something that, in listening to everyone, we're all making those strides. And I would love to sort of hear from everyone what partnerships have been really essential in the scaling of your particular program within your locale.
I'm happy to kick things off again, if that's okay. I think, here in Connecticut, we have a key partnership with our sister agency, the Department of Social Services, because, we are automatically enrolling these kids, and, we know that is a best practice. And so it was really important for us to have that part of the program. But we, as the treasurer's office, we don't have that data. And so early on, on, we knew that we really had to form this key partnership and have buy-in from our Department of Social Services so that we can come together and not just sort of get the basic data that we'll need to know the number of the children who were born, because that's important as we are transferring the funds, but we need to know who the babies are. And that is, as going back to your first question about lessons learned, that is something that I have continued to learn throughout this process, is the importance of data, and how hard it is to connect and know that this, baby Jennifer Patetti is the same baby Jennifer Patetti over here in 18 years, right? So, that is like one of the main partnerships. And then, as I mentioned before, having these community organizations that we really have connected with a broad variety of organizations, from local health centers and providers to different sort of financial literacy organizations, and everything in between, municipal government. And so making all of those connections has really been important for the program, to not only spread awareness, but also to get feedback from the community and from, the direct service providers who are working with families directly. Are they receiving information about baby bonds? Is it, what are the questions? Do they have questions? How is that? How is our message resonating? Do people feel that trust yet? Which again is another lesson that we're continuing to learn, is how important building trust is. And so I would say, those are sort of the key partnerships that we're seeing as being really foundational.
And I'll go ahead and open it up and bring Ray and Willie back into this conversation. I know that Ray had a slide that talked about sort of the nuances of the federal 530A program as it begins to ramp up. And what I'd love sort of open this up, and Ray and Willie, feel free to jump in here. But what do you see from your perspective? He listed off some of the greatest opportunities and risk for states and municipalities that are already sort of doing this work. Where are you all thinking, and what conversations are sort of bubbling up where you're located? And Ray and Willie, I definitely open it up to you.
Sure. I've spoken with two local foundations, and we hope we're successful, like Carl was, in getting support, philanthropic support, to do a whole range of things around 530A. 530As first, of course, try to get as many families to claim the accounts as possible, especially if they qualify for the 1,000. Secondly, the Dell money will reach probably most of the families that are represented on this call, so $250. And that money is not for the kids getting the $1,000 at birth. It's for kids age 10 and under, who are not yet, who are already living. So, make sure that you get the 250 from the Dells to get the whole process started and generate more contributions. Third, philanthropies, along with states and nonprofits and tribes and others, can do what the Dells and the Dalios have done, is make a contribution under the general contribution clause, to beef up the accounts. And there are some rules around that, as I mentioned, and that money would go through Treasury and then back to the families. Fourth, families, if they don't want to go through Treasury, can make a more direct contribution to the family based on the $5,000 overall that a family can make in contributions per year. Treasury doesn't know and doesn't really care where the money comes from, right? As long as it doesn't exceed that $5,000 cap. So I think those are the very immediate opportunities. Certainly, there's enough opportunities that I think a philanthropy could also fund a coordinated, sustained effort over many years, and potentially mimic what Texas and Oklahoma have done, which is to provide a state match for the $1,000, that the federal government is providing, or to rally the employers in your community to make contributions as well.
So I'm going to jump in, I guess, and I'm just going to riff off of kind of what I've heard. I forget the original question, so I might not directly answer it, but nonetheless, and there was a chapter, and I don't even know if I really should do this, but I'm putting the chapter of a book that I'm working on that's not published yet in here, but because I thought it'd be exciting for a lot of you to read. And so one of the things we should think about when we're thinking about Trump accounts is that they're a starting point, not the end point. In much the same way that in 1991 when Sheridan, proposed his book. And I think the great thing about it is that if we understand it that way, and we're beginning to see like these multiple streams of assets, right? I'm going to throw in the chat here a link to New York City Kids Rise. It's a program. It's a really large program in New York because of the size of New York and it's for the whole city. And they've done many of these kinds of things. So as you're looking for an example in your own neighborhood, they've had churches provide money to different locations within their church location. They have housing developments who have done donations to their citywide accounts for it. So there's like just we got to let our imagination go to some level, right? We've been confined by the way we've seen how the world works in our lifetime, but we're entering a new phase, a new opportunity, a new structure is now available for us to kind of figure out how we could use best. I would tell you for sure, I think Ray would agree, is that Trump accounts aren't where we want to stop for sure, right? There are limitations and problems with them, but they can be something that we build on and move forward on. And one of those things is kind of really beginning to think about an integrated social welfare theory, where we're thinking about how baby bonds, CSAs, and these different things, which are really very similar in origin and story, as I mentioned before, if they were put together, would work so much better. That to me is the next step, right? Right now, we want to think about all these things as here's a new program, here's another program, here's another program. We're dividing our money here, dividing our money there. But if we stack all that money into one account, we were more systemic, it'd be much stronger in the long run. That's somewhere we need to get to. We're not there yet. Go ahead, Ray.
Well, I just want to build on Willie's really important point here. In an ideal world, multiple streams of assets would mean multiple contributors to one account. We're not there yet. Okay, right now we have these three strategies around the country, not uniform, right? Different products, different platforms, different purposes. It's hard for them to work together. But that should be our North Star, is that they do work together. In the meantime, I know that some states, including California, and others are developing like a portal, like a dashboard, working with the record keepers or working with tech companies so that a family can see all the accounts available to them in one spot and potentially access them through one spot as well. So until we can do like a more formal policy integration, we can think about tech integrations that make it feel like a family has access to one account that might have three sub-accounts.
Well, Ray,
Yeah.
we're counting on you to do the integration there, buddy. So like
Oh,
that's the next step, right? I just want to say, I want to pick up on Willie's comments. I think you're absolutely right, Willie. And we've talked about this for years, right? We need to create the opportunity for the dollars to flow. And you're right, the 538 accounts are they're just the beginning. It's not the end. We are thinking about, as Ray talked about, we'd love in Durham to find additional donors to help support these accounts. We're also thinking about the question we haven't talked about yet here, but like, so what about kids who don't qualify for the $1,000, right? Because they don't have a parent with a social. So we're also thinking about how do we build, in a sense, at least for right now, until you build the integration, right? Like almost a parallel system, right? So we set up accounts for kids separately who don't qualify for Trump accounts, but also can get the same initial wealth building endowment. So those are pieces that we want to build for the future. If I'm not mistaken, Rebecca, I think you've got a donor in San Francisco that's also matching 538 accounts in San Francisco. So I think this is absolutely possible once we get the infrastructure set up.
I will just quickly say there is a word of caution. I'm an asset researcher, right? And I'm really for all this in many ways. Having multiple accounts, multiple things, which really serve similar purposes, really break it down. Read the book I'm going to send out. But the point of it is we also build bureaucracy. We also increase cost of running, of having an asset-based system when we continue. Now I think what you're doing, I'm not talking about the city and state level, because you kind of have to do what you have to do. At the federal level, we need to be a little more imaginative and put in a structure moving forward and demand and not be satisfied kind of where we're at. We can praise it and say what's good about it, but we can also say, this is why you really hey, stack money. Just think about if we put money in multiple accounts, that money doesn't build as much. One thing rich people have is they put a lot of money in one account, right? It builds very high for them. Not one account. They have many accounts they can put lots of money in. But you get the idea. We need to be able to do those things. And when we make it hard for people to access it, we got to promote each one of these ideas, right? That's money, dollars spent on advertising, talking to people about. It's not a really good way. This is how we built social welfare for years. A non-integrated, messy system with a lot of bureaucracy that has a lot of extra costs in it that's very hard to navigate.
I really appreciate that point, Willie. Thank you for making it. I wanted to share a couple things in response to what you've both shared. We've heard a lot of really positive things about the 530A accounts. If I may be a Debbie Downer for a second, I want to share some of the concerns that we in San Francisco have, and then I did also want to mention a bit about the work we're doing in California to help children access all their accounts. So, as you know, right now, those 530A accounts require families to opt in. We're really hopeful. And that means, I want to just be clear, I think evidence shows us that most eligible children will be excluded simply because they have to opt in. That's what the evidence from the CSA field shows us. And so I'm hopeful, Ray, that all of the behind the scenes work to move to opt out will be successful. We know also that these accounts are limited to children who have a work authorized social security number. And you all might be saying, well, it's an at-birth program. So every baby born in the US between 2025 and 2028 is going to be eligible. But I just encourage you to consider it in the context of the federal government attempting to overturn birthright citizenship. That's on our mind. It's concerning to us. The application form requires parents and guardians to provide their own social security number. The 4547 form also has a spot for an ITIN, but in practice, this is expected to discourage mixed status families from applying. So in San Francisco, that's almost 20% of our children. 18% of children have at least one non-citizen parent in our city. Nationwide, there are 7 million children who have at least one non-citizen parent. So that's a big chunk of people who will reasonably feel concerned about opting in. There are also steep financial penalties for making mistakes. So taxpayers who sign up for the seed deposit for an ineligible child face penalties of $500 to $1,000. So if it's a mistake that's classified as including, negligence or disregard for the rules. So claiming a child who isn't an eligible child for tax purposes, the fine is $500. And that to me could be a mistake, if you have divorced parents or, you're not sure who your qualifying child is. If it's defined as fraud, the fine is $1,000. And then we've covered the limitations around countable assets for public benefits. In effect, does it put an asset cap on this account of like $2,000 for young people who think they're going to be using SSI, just for instance, right? Even though officially there's not an asset limit if they're going to get kicked off of SSI when they turn 18. And then there's that kind of unknown impact of the accounts on FAFSA and on student aid. So these are all things that I know I'm so happy Ray and the team are like working behind the scenes to try to solve. Some of them are solvable. Some of them right now and in the next 3 years are probably not going to be solved, but hopefully long term, we have the infrastructure and there's promise here. So I'm sorry, I'm talking a lot, but let me briefly tell you about what we're doing in California. So we have a new organization called the Early Wealth Partnership that spun off from our CSA coalition. And I'm on the advisory committee for it. And we've put together a plan to bring, even before Trump accounts were established, to bring all of our local, state, and now the federal early wealth programs into alignment and to make it easy for children who are eligible for multiple programs to access them. So just as an example, a child who's in foster care in San Francisco would be able to receive not only $50 from my program, but also $1,000 from our statewide program, CalKids, $3,000 from the HOPE account, which is our forthcoming baby bond, plus perhaps that $250 from the Trump account. So this adds up to $4,300. This is what we call an asset stack. And even though I want to just say, like, I totally respect and agree with what Willie's saying, we don't want this to be hard. So our interim solution here is that the Early Wealth Partnership has developed specs for a technology solution that would serve as basically a front door for all the relevant accounts. So it's not as easy. It's not really going to look like you have one account, but there's one place, we hope, that families would be able to go and see all of the things they're eligible for. And we are speaking to some leading technology firms about developing this. And our goal, I want to say, is to create a tool in California that then can be replicated and used nationwide. It just seems like an essential way to ensure that, given that right now what we have are a lot of accounts, we can help make families as successful as possible.
Thank you. And I'm gonna hop in and I'm gonna let Ray go, but I just want to remind people, go ahead and put your questions into the chat or into the Q&A. We're gonna open up the floor in a few minutes. But Ray, I'm gonna go ahead and let you go.
I just wanted to thank Rebecca for saying more thoroughly and more eloquently about the concerns we share about Trump accounts. We are working very hard, especially on auto enrollment, but other features to correct those. I think of Trump accounts as a down payment on a big idea that can and should be improved over time. We really do have to take a long view here. Thank you.
And Tobias, if I could jump in real quick too,
Yeah,
so I
absolutely.
really appreciate Becca mentioning those. And, that's exactly the kind of conversation we've had on the ground here in Durham as well. Like, okay, we recognize there's some challenges here. And so also some questions that haven't been answered. One thing you did mention, Becca, is that we've had a couple of folks go through the Trump accounts portal and actually sign up. And right now, the response you get from the portal is like, there's a couple steps you got to go through. You got to confirm your eligibility, but you also have to be prepared for an email that's going to come from someone that helps you to sign up for the account. So that there's an opportunity right there potentially for fraud, right? Fraudsters coming in and saying claim your account. So we're aware of that. We're aware of the immigration concerns at the same time, and so that's why it's important to have trusted partners like Tobias at Book Harvest who really can sort of help us think through how do we properly message this, because we don't want to get this wrong with our residents. I think we sort of balance that with the recognition that you're right. If we do nothing, families who with means will get the account anyway. And so I think our goal here is to make sure as many kids in Durham, especially those who wouldn't normally claim the account, claim them, but recognize that it's not perfect right now. We've got to make sure we get the messaging right and improve it over time, as Ray and others are doing at the federal level.
I am hoping this will be a different moment in our history where we can both be creative on the ground, spend lots of extra energy and money to figure out these solutions to help mask an imperfect product. At the same time, put as much energy, if not more, into pressing the federal government as we move forward here, that it create a better system for us to work in before it becomes so unworldly and so problematic because of its expenses and everything else that it's doing that people end up hating it and throwing it out with the bathwater in the long run. So I just think we really need to put that energy in and we can do both things at once. Say, here's something we can work from. Here's what we're doing to fix it on the ground to make it work. But we really need federal government to create a policy that we understand would work better for everybody and be more efficient in the long run.
Absolutely. And you all have answered my sort of last question here, which was really, what we know that all of this is evolving, and what should we be paying attention to and continuing to discuss as we move along. And I'd love, if there's folks who have resources and other things, I know we'll send these out after, but if anyone has any words before we open it up to the Q&A around what you all will be paying most attention to and really continuing to discuss.
I can start if I just very briefly. I mean, people from all over the country submitted comments to the Treasury Department by February 20th on a whole range of really critical implementation issues. We expect further guidance from Treasury soon, including who will be the initial bank or trustee that will hold the accounts. Keep in mind that at some point, a family will be able to roll that account out of that Treasury appointed trustee to a financial institution of their choice. We don't know when that will happen, but it will happen at some point. So we're paying attention to that. Also, just uptake. There's an effort to get the $1,000 extended beyond 2028, and I think a lot of that will depend on the perception policymakers have of the success of the program so far.
I'll jump in. I guess I don't see anybody else's mute off. And I would say, I'm going to give you an opportunity. I say not really but a whole group of us, an opportunity to do some of what I was talking about a minute ago by throwing the link in again to the kind of Occupy 2.0 movement, right? That I'm talking, because you can have a chance to be doing all this great work in your community. At the same time, let's put a little light on federal government and on others about the wealth inequality in America, and that we need to do a little bit more than what we're doing by simply signing up for that. Just a quick note on that is important because we're watching, and we hope to bring together in May, not just to have a protest or something, but bring together in May a group of thought leaders so that we can take this to the next level. But then we'll have some information about all these things. We'll bring together people from the kind of Trump account side, from baby bonds and everybody else, and really have further discussions about how we come together and how do we build a system that's best for poor people and not necessarily just our own idea.
I love that. Thanks, Willie. Something I'm going to have my eyes on is how this really strong network of local CSAs, cities, states, some of them are school districts, nonprofits that are already doing this work, have been doing this work for 20 years. Actually, as of the end of 2025, more than 825,000 children had CSAs through 108 locally based programs. Those programs know how to reach families, know how to help them in a hands-on way to put their hands on their assets and use them. And so I am hoping to see more and more sort of leaning in and leveraging of that incredible collection of local resources as this excitement, rightfully so, about new federal and state and philanthropic investments come online. Let's lean into those 108 CSA programs and learn from them. And also with respect to Jennifer, like existing baby bonds programs that are there and have been doing the work, we can all learn so much, and we'll have more success if we lean into that.
Yeah, and I love, Becca, what you said about the excitement, because we in Connecticut we're really excited about the philanthropic interest that has really grown from Trump accounts. And I think I can't remember who mentioned the Dalio investment early on, and which was great to hear about that in Connecticut. But we have Connecticut Baby Bonds, right? That is also looking for philanthropic partners, and we're having those conversations. And so we're really hoping to kind of piggyback off of that excitement and interest, and get folks engaged for what we've been doing in Connecticut, the baby bonds since 2023. So really excited and looking forward to that.
Well, Jennifer, you must have been sneaking into the questions, because someone had said, is there a possibility of inviting/wooing Dalio to contribute to Connecticut baby bonds accounts instead of and/or addition to the Trump accounts? And we would not be sad over an addition.
Exactly. We're hoping.
Yeah. So there is a question for Rebecca and Jennifer. Can you discuss local champions, whether that be teachers, parents, community leaders, that help your local and state programs be stronger? And I know you touched a little bit on the different partnerships.
Sure, I can start. So, of course, we would not exist without a very close partnership with our public school district. And then on top of that, we have partnered with, so I should say the school district, of course, provides data on new students twice a year. So we cover the whole district, not just students who enter in kindergarten, but anybody who might transfer in at a later date. We also have partnered with different city departments and community-based organizations that have relationships and have the trust of families families, because as I think you said it, Tabitha, giving away free money is not easy, and people rightly should be suspicious that it's a scam, right? So it's on us. The burden is on us, all of us, to convince people that this is real and safe and legitimate. And we do that best when we have partnerships with organizations that community members already trust. And so that's been our approach. One of the things we do is we have a K2C ambassador model. So these might be teachers, they might be school district staff, but also parents who basically sign up to spread the good word about the program through their networks. And that's been really effective because, believe it or not, some families really respond well to getting a piece of mail from the school district or from the treasurer's office. But some really want to hear the word from another parent who says, this is real, I did this. And it's even better now because we have these 3 classes of students who have graduated who can talk about, this is what K2C meant to me. And not only that, this is what I'm doing. I'm in college now. And even if they had only $50 in their account, we have heard them say, I used it to buy a backpack or a textbook, or it helped me feel a little bit more secure as I applied for financial aid. So that's, those are kind of some of the ways that we've been communicating about the program.
Yeah. And one of the things that you mentioned is just the number of people and community partners that you have. And for us with Book Baby or with Bright Futures, it has been tremendous for us to have a relationship with the banking institution. So we have a credit union that we work specifically with, and we actually host events at their office to really get families with our literacy coaches, to get the families to see that their trusted agent trusts this particular institution. And so for us, we've built a really great relationship with the local credit union here. And I will hold before my next question. Jennifer, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, just 2 other groups, and I'm loving this. I'm taking notes. All of this is like really, really insightful and I think helpful for us as we're continuing to build out the program. But I think 2 groups that we are starting to engage with that we feel are really important in terms of like building that trust that hasn't already been mentioned are, faith leaders in Connecticut, clergy, really engaging those communities, but also employers, which is not something that we originally had anticipated as being, kind of part of this network. But we think that that is another sort of trusted messenger. If your employer is telling you about this program that's available to your family, we think that's that's sort of another avenue for outreach as well.
And I know that we have here, one of the questions is, would it help to have hospitals, pediatricians, family doctors mention 530As to families at the time of birth and encourage participation, at least until we can make it automatic? And so I'm not sure, Ray, if you have a response to that. I know, Carl, we've had this conversation several times.
Yeah, for sure. And then I can just jump in real quick. Yeah, we're still building this in Durham, but certainly one of our biggest employers our biggest private employer is Duke University. It's also where the medical center is. And so the vast majority of babies born in Durham are born at the Duke University Medical Center. So we are deep in conversations with them about making sure we're communicating with families in the hospital at birth about this, as well as other partners like Book Harvest that are working with families early in kids' lives. So that's absolutely one of the key scale partners that we're thinking about as we build this in Durham.
And as part of that too, we do have a home visiting program here in Durham that's open to any Durham resident and whom has just given birth. And so thinking about how to work with organizations like Family Connects that would be able to assist with this, and or any of our additional partners who work with us here at Book Babies and that we are with. But you just saw a poll pop up on your screen. So I want to make sure that people are completing the poll so that we can hear from you what was great and what you'd love to see in future webinars. And so our last question I would love to just hear, and this is a curiosity that I wanted to throw in. Willie, I would love to hear a little bit about what additional research or gaps you have that you'd like to help understand as we are moving into these different, into the 30As, what are some potential research gaps that you'd love to sort of tease at?
Well, actually, Ray and I was on a conversation about this earlier today. And first of all, I think we just need to make sure that we're clear to the administration that it would be good to have a research group of some sort, tracking and researching these kind of independently so that we have an understanding of where they're doing well. One of the key areas that we're interested in, because we really do believe in this, from what we've learned in the CDA field, if you don't do automatic enrollment, you're just really not going to get everybody. And so tracking those numbers and making sure that we're seeing the kind of uptake with kind of a tax time approach. And our evidence suggests, hitting above 40% will be really outreaching. And that's a concern. I think research around how these caps are affecting, I think both the literal cap and what Rebecca talked about, the implicit cap, of just fading off of welfare and different things because or fear of that. How does that prevent people from doing? So I think some qualitative work too, looking at whether or not people feel a lot of fear around signing up because of and just tracking the media around how do those conversations play out in the media around talking about boosting those fears among people, which is a different kind of research. So I think but I think the biggest, and I'll stop, question really for us immediately is just uptake. Who's getting to take advantage of this $1,000? Who's in the system and who's not, and trying to evaluate that.
Absolutely. And, I think and I'll give a moment to this question, but I know that one of the biggest questions, if it's not universal and otherwise, what are some of the strategies for reaching those families that are hardest to reach? And I don't know, Willie, if you've heard through your research that.
I think Becca mentioned some of the better ones, particularly with having mouth to mouth, people talking about it. I think this is unique from even what we've seen in that even tonight we would expect the president to speak on these accounts, right? And so you have this federal broadcast that you wouldn't have, national media attention that you wouldn't have, saying all that, maybe they get themselves to 50%, right? You can spend money until you're blue in the face to achieve the kind of close to 100% you want. The only economic and efficient way to do that is through automatic enrollment. We know this.
I would just add that automatic enrollment isn't either on or off. There's hybrid versions. So, for example, the Treasury working with the IRS can sort of figure out who signed up through the portal, but then check that against birth records and social security numbers, and then get those kids in. Something else states can do is cooperate with their Department of Health and figure out the eligible universe of kids who are at least qualify for the $1,000. And as a matter of fact, the state of Kansas has a bill to do exactly that, to use birth records to target kids to make sure that they're at least aware of the kids who are eligible. So we're going to fight like hell for automatic enrollment. We're not going to stop, but I think there are things we can do in the interim.
Yeah. Oh, Carl, go right ahead.
I was going to say, no, Ray and Willie are absolutely right. I know that years ago in Maine, before it became automatic in Maine, I think with Herculean efforts, really incredible good marketing and messaging and depth of marketing, as about 40% of families max signed up. So I think there's almost like a ceiling there that we know we can't go above until we get this automatic. So, but again, as Willie said, this is a starting point. This is not where we want to end up. And I think a lot of the hard work on the ground that Jennifer and Becca and we're trying to do in Durham will build up from the bottom. But I think we're counting on folks like Ray and others at the federal level with Willie's good research to make the case for why we need to make these accounts as easy to open up as possible.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, and there's a lot of unknown still there. And it's really an interesting time in the space. And I am so grateful to have had to share the screen with you all. And this has been a great conversation. I want to thank all of our folks who have attended as well. And I will pass it over to Jenny.
Thank you, Tabitha. I would also like to thank everyone who joined us today, and to our panelists and to Baitha. What a rich conversation. You've really helped us to understand the complexities and the nuances of these opportunities, and in hopes, I think, that all of us on this call can now go out and work to help families take advantage of these programs that they're entitled to take advantage of. So thank you so much for all that you've done today with us, as well as all that you're doing out there in the world to make these opportunities available. And we could have, I think, gone on for another hour. So appreciate everything that you've brought to the conversation. For those of you who weren't here at the beginning, I just wanted to again mention some upcoming sessions that we have. Next week, we will have one that's focused on accessibility, same language subtitling, learning and literacy. That will be, and in this time slot, 3 o'clock Eastern time. And then the following week, we will have 2 sessions focused on parent and family partners and engagement. At 12:30, our Crucible of Practice Salon, building public will for literacy by igniting parent and family engagement. And the 3 o'clock Eastern slot, Parents as Essential Partners, which will focus on reducing chronic absenteeism. And then finally, on March 17th, the Teacher Pipeline, Creating Enduring Pathways into Teaching. So we'll focus on that as well. So thanks to all of you for joining us. We hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and that we'll see you next week or sometime soon.